"Stand up, Evan," my mother said into the microphone. The whole ballroom went quiet in that polished, expensive way rich people used when they wanted to watch someone bleed without admitting it. I stayed seated in the last row, beside the service doors, with a folded napkin in my lap and my hands locked around the chair. Mom smiled wider. "Come on," she said, "let everyone see what happens when potential is wasted." A few guests laughed. My father raised his champagne glass like he was toasting the joke. Across the room, my brother Nolan sat beneath a gold banner that read, "Congratulatons, Doctor." CALDR, grinning like the world had finally admitted he owned it. Then the side doors opened. A silver-haired man in a navy suit walked in carrying a black folder. He passed my parents, past Nolan, and stopped in front of me. "Mr. Calder," he said quietly, "the wire cleared 17 minutes ago." I opened the folder. $52 million. And then he leaned closer. "It's time they learn who you really are." My mother's smile froze before the applause had fully died. Nolan's Yale graduation party had been designed to remind everyone of one thing: he was the successful son, and I was the mistake who still carried the family name. The country club ballroom glittered with white roses, crystal glasses, and guests who had spent the evening asking me the same question in different ways. "So, Evan, are you working now?" "Still figuring things out." "Your parents must be very patient." I gave the same small answer every time, something like that. They didn't know my parents had placed me in the last row on purpose. The family table was at the front, under the chandelier, where Nolan sat between Mom and Dad like a crowned prince. I sat near the servers, close enough to hear the kitchen doors swing open, far enough away to understand exactly what I was worth to them. Mom lifted her glass again. "Nolan has proven what discipline looks like," she said. "So tonight his father and I are giving him what he deserves." Nolan leaned back, already smiling. "A Ferrari," she announced, waiting outside, "and a $15 million penthouse in Manhattan purchased through the family trust." The room broke into applause. Dad's phone buzzed. He glanced down and for half a second the color drained from his face. Then it buzzed again. Mom kept talking. Nolan laughed with his friends and said, "A life that finally matches my name." That was when Mom turned the microphone toward me. "And some children," she said, "teach us patience." Then the man with the folder arrived. Now every face in the ballroom was turned toward me, and my father's phone began ringing non-stop. Why did a stranger know more about me than my own family did? My fingers stayed on the edge of the folder. Not because I didn't understand the number. Because I did. Across the ballroom, my mother lowered the microphone slowly, as if one wrong movement might make the whole room notice her hand shaking. "Who are you?" she asked the man in the navy suit. He didn't look at her. "Daniel Voss," he said, "counsel for Mr. Evan Calder." My father's champagne glass stopped halfway to the table. I knew Daniel. I had met him 3 months earlier in a downtown office with no family photos, no soft chairs, and no patience for lies. I had gone there after finding one strange bank notice tucked inside my grandfather Arthur's old desk, a notice addressed to the estate, a notice my parents had never mentioned. Mom stepped closer, smiling with only her teeth. "Evan," she said softly, "whatever this is, close the folder." That voice took me backward. Back to Grandpa Arthur's guest room, where I slept beside a stack of medication charts after his stroke. Back to the nights I spent cleaning his old hard drives while he dozed in a recliner, whispering, "You see patterns other people miss, kid." My parents called it hiding. "You're wasting your 20s playing nurse," Dad told me once. Mom was worse. "Nolan is building a future. You're clinging to a dying man because he's the only one who claps for you." When Grandpa died, they handed me a cardboard box. "Notebooks," Dad said. "Old drives, sentimental things, don't expect anything else." Inside Daniel's folder now was a trust amendment I had never seen. Arthur's remaining founder shares had been transferred away from me and toward Nolan. At the bottom was my signature. The date punched through me. I had supposedly signed it while I was at the hospital with Grandpa, holding his hand through his final night. Mom leaned close enough for her perfume to burn. "Close it," she whispered. I looked up. "Why is my name forged on Grandpa's trust papers?" Daniel turned toward my mother. "Because someone in this room thought he would never check." The laugh that followed was thin and nervous. No one knew whether it was still safe to be amused. My mother turned back to the room, like she could still rescue the party by performing harder. "Everyone, please," she said, lifting one hand. "This is a private family misunderstanding. Evan has always been sensitive about Nolan's achievements." Nolan stood from the head table. "Mom, don't waste your breath," he said, loud enough for his friends to hear. "He's been jealous since we were kids." A few people looked at me, waiting for the usual version of the story to settle back into place. Evan the dependent one, Evan the bitter one, Evan who couldn't manage his life, let alone a legal document. Dad moved toward me. "Give me the folder," he said. Daniel stepped between us. "No." That one word changed the room more than any speech could have. Dad stopped. Daniel opened the folder and laid 3 pages on the nearest table. "The first document," he said, "is the trust amendment bearing Evan's forged signature. The second is Arthur Calder's original share certificate. The third is an email chain between Richard Calder and the family banker discussing how to prevent Evan from reviewing estate records." The room went silent. Mom's smile disappeared. Nolan scoffed, but it came out too fast. "What, Grandpa left him money because he fixed a computer once?" Daniel looked at him. "Arthur left Evan voting control because Evan helped rebuild the cybersecurity prototype after Arthur's stroke. Those shares were minor then. They are not minor now." Dad's phone rang again. This time everyone heard it. A server hurried in from the side hall and leaned toward him. "Mr. Calder, the dealership manager, is on the line. The Ferrari wire was rejected." Nolan's face changed. Outside the glass doors, the red-covered car sat beneath the valet lights like a trophy turning into evidence. Then Nolan lunged forward, snatched 1 page from the folder and tore it in half. Daniel didn't blink. "That copy was for courtesy. The originals are already with the court." "Security," my father snapped. 2 men near the ballroom doors straightened immediately. For most of my life that was all Dad needed. 1 word, 1 look. Someone else would move and I would be the one escorted out, corrected, silenced, reduced. But this time the club manager stepped in front of them. "I'm sorry, Mr. Calder," he said, voice tight. "We just received a call from your bank. Until this is clarified, we can't interfere." Dad stared at him like he had forgotten servants could say no. Daniel gathered the torn pieces from the table and placed them calmly into the folder. "The 52 million did not come from a random inheritance," he said. "It came from the acquisition payout tied to Arthur Calder's original shareholder records." Mom's eyes cut to me. Daniel continued. "Those records were reviewed under court order after Evan provided Arthur's notebooks, archived development logs, and the hard drives your family dismissed as junk." A cold line moved through my chest. The missing pages from Grandpa's desk. Mom telling me the notebooks were sentimental trash. Dad pushing tax forms across the kitchen table after the funeral, saying, "Just sign where marked." Nolan suddenly asking questions about a company he had never cared about before. Pieces I had carried alone finally locked into place in front of everyone. Dad's phone rang again. He answered, listened, then turned away too late for anyone to miss his face. Across the room, the penthouse broker stood from his table, grabbed his coat and slipped toward the back hall. Nolan saw him leave. "What's going on?" he demanded. Daniel answered before Dad could. "The Manhattan escrow is frozen." A whisper moved through the room. Mom stepped toward me, her voice cracking under the polish. "You owe us obedience, Evan. We raised you, we housed you. We tolerated this endless failure." I looked at Daniel. "Does the investigation include the trust account that paid for Nolan's life?" Daniel nodded once. "Every transfer made after Arthur's death." Nolan stepped back. Dad grabbed Mom's wrist. Before I could speak again, the ballroom doors opened, and 2 federal financial investigators walked in. "We are looking for Richard Calder." The 2 investigators did not raise their voices. They did not need to. One of them showed Richard a badge and said, "Mr. Calder, we need to speak with you regarding unauthorized transfers from the Arthur Calder Estate Trust." My father looked around the ballroom, searching for someone important enough to make this disappear. No one moved. Daniel placed the folder back in my hands and turned one page toward me. "This is Arthur's letter," he said. I looked down and saw my grandfather's handwriting. "Evan sees what others miss. He does not chase applause. That is why I trust him with what matters." The room blurred for half a second. Daniel continued, calm and exact. "Arthur Calder left Evan voting control over his remaining founder shares because Evan helped preserve and rebuild the cybersecurity architecture after Arthur's stroke. The company was small then, but Arthur documented Evan's work, his access logs, and his ownership rights." Mom shook her head. Arthur was confused. He was sick. Daniel looked at her. The documents were signed before the stroke. The development records were time-stamped. The signatures were verified. Yours were not. That was when the final truth landed. My parents had found Grandpa's documents after he died. They had seen the shares, seen the note, and understood there was a chance the company might become valuable. So they moved everything into the family trust, forged my consent, and built Nolan's future on money they had no right to touch. All those years, calling me the family failure had not just been cruelty. It had been cover. If everyone believed I was useless, no one would question why I had been left with nothing. Nolan gripped the back of his chair. "So what?" he said, but his voice cracked. "You're saying the money is his." Daniel turned to him. The acquisition payout could not legally pass through a corrupted trust. Once the court reviewed Arthur's original records, the wire was redirected to the rightful equity holder. He looked at me. "That is why $52 million went to Evan." Mom stared at me like I had become someone she could not order around. Dad's phone slipped slightly in his hand. Outside, through the glass doors, 2 men from the dealership removed the cover from the Ferrari. The red paint flashed under the valet lights. Then they got in and drove it away. Nolan watched it leave. No one laughed now. The penthouse broker was already gone. The escrow had collapsed. The family trust was frozen. Richard was led to a side room with the investigators, his shoulders stiff, his face empty. Margaret tried to follow him, but one of the investigators stopped her and asked her to remain available for questioning. For the first time all night, my mother spoke to me without an audience in her voice. "Evan," she said, softer now, "we are still your family." I looked at the woman who had asked me to stand so strangers could laugh at me. Family would have told the truth before strangers had to. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I signed the documents Daniel placed before me. Further withdrawals from the trust were frozen. Transfers after Grandpa's death would be reviewed. Nolan's name, the one he said deserved a better life, now sat inside a financial investigation he could not charm his way out of. I did not make a speech. I did not ask anyone to apologize. I walked through the front entrance while the same guests who had laughed at me stepped aside. Weeks later, I moved into Grandpa Arthur's old lake house. I reopened his workshop, restored his desk, and set his notebooks back where they belonged. With part of the money, I funded a scholarship in his name for students who built quietly, without applause. The first page of Daniel's folder hangs in my office now. Not as revenge. As proof. The family failure had never failed. They had simply mistaken silence for weakness.